Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and welcome to some old footage of me painting up this Scylla Legion Dragonborn in the colors of Warhammer 40,000's Alpha Legion, of course. So this video was recorded about a year ago, but I'm doing the editing and voiceover now, so some of the paints might not be exact, but the first step is to paint all of the armor with a bright silver. I'm using silver ink here, but you could use mithril silver or even lead belcher if you wanted to. That's what I do for most of my units. I was just experimenting at the time with some different methods. This is pretty simple, just don't get it on the cloak or the dragon pelt on his shoulders to the best of your ability. We will be painting with rather strong paints throughout all of this, so it's not the end of the world if you do, but just try and keep that in mind. This will probably take 2 coats, but it's really no big deal. Just give it a little extra time to dry. It is truly bright, almost gleaming. It's very, very fun paint to use, or ink rather. So just make sure you get it nice and even over all the armor, and including all the little dangly bits off of his belt, for example. Once you get it to this sort of area, we're going to apply effectively a wash, so it's actually a contrast paint, of Griffcharger Gray. This just brings in a slightly green-blue tinge to the metal we just painted down, and will help highlight all the details on the silver areas like the trim, and also just sort of adds in a bit of a deeper blue base for the next step, which is going to be using Achillean Green. Now this model is from a range known as the Scylla Legion, who are a 3D printed range of miniatures that all sort of have this dragonic sort of inspiration, lots of scales on their armor and stuff like that. This guy is a sort of champion model, if you will, and I decided this would be a Chaos Lord for my Chaos Space Marines army. I mean, why not? I think he fits the bill pretty well. So, with his giant sword, that would of course fall under the weapons of a Chaos Lord. I'd use it mainly as a Demon Hammer, even though I guess it would be more close to an Accursed Weapon, simply because I like the stats of the Demon Hammer more. And that would of course be the Demon Hammer, which has Dev Wounds, 5 attacks, a hit on 3, Strength 8, AP 2, and Damage 2, so quite punchy and very powerful against most targets, especially with that Devastating Wounds ability. Now, moving on to the next step, it's fairly simple. We are just going to apply the main color of the armor. This is Achillean Green, another contrast paint by Games Workshop, that you just want to apply over all the flat bits. Thankfully, at least with the print I had, the details here were all quite well defined, so it was fairly easy to just run my brush alongside all these details to paint everything in one nice coat. Now with contrast, you generally only want to apply one layer at a time, of course, with all paints, but don't go back over a layer until it's dried, basically. If it's immediate, it's generally fine, but you generally want to just put it down and let it rest until it's fully dry. Then you can go back and make corrections, because it could tear up the surface area of the paint and could ruin the finish. This is going to go over all over the metal parts that aren't the trim or fancy bits. And if you do get any on the fancy bits, that's fine, as we'll be correcting it later. As you can see, I got it mostly done here. Just don't forget any of the little smaller details, like the shoulder pad sticking out under the cape in this example, or the under the shoulder pad bits on that same arm, actually. As you can see, this step is very easy, and I think it looks very cool. There's something about the metallic bluish green that I think just really helps the Alpha Legion stand out. No matter what model it's on, it seems to look really nice. For example, I think it actually looks really good on Rubric Marines, which is a video I should do, I think. Well, I could give him a Power Fist as a secondary weapon. He obviously isn't modeled with one, and I don't want to make that too confusing, so I will give him the Plasma Pistol with the stats you can see here. The Plasma Pistol has 1 attack that hits on 3s at Strength 7, AP 2, and Damage 1. You can overcharge it, which gives it hazardous, with 1 attack that hits on 3s at Strength 8, AP 3, and Damage 2, both at 12-inch range. Though he has a small chance to blow himself up, I think the extra range damage does just help him a little bit with clearing out things like enemy infantry that he doesn't really want to bother fighting. As you can see here, we're going to paint the cloth with Screamer Pink, which is a very deep reddish pink that I think complements the greenish blue armor exceptionally well. So just get this over the cape and the tabard underneath the armor plates. And again, this will take 2 thin coats. Screamer Pink does apply rather well over almost any color, but still, 2 thin coats is always the way to go, just to make sure you're not building up too much brush detail. Now, of course, this guy is a Chaos Space Marine, so his stats are fairly standard, though with more wounds for a Chaos Space Marine, as we see here. He's 90 points, so relatively expensive, but he does move 6 inches, which is standard. Toughness 4, which makes him somewhat resilient to small arms, with a 3+ save and a very nice 4+ invulnerable save, 5 wounds, leadership 6+, and OC 1. Very solid stats for a character, if nothing standout. He'll definitely get sniped if he's on his own, so make sure he has a bodyguard, which we'll cover in a moment. As you can see here, I'm using Pro Acryl Blue-White, which, despite its name, does apply as mostly a pure white until you get to 3 or 4 layers, over the Dragon Pelt. This is mainly just a bit of a reference. Not only does the white work well with the color scheme, I wanted to paint it as a Blue Eyes White Dragon from Yu-Gi-Oh, of course. This, again, just apply it in 2 coats. It should go on just fine after that. Pro Acryl's paints come quite thick, so make sure you thin it down a lot, but they're very powerful in pigment, so it's definitely a worthy trade-off. You probably will make a couple mistakes here, but we'll cover that more in a sort of fixing mistakes area. As I mentioned, this guy can be a leader, and should be. Let's cover the units he can lead now. First up, we have the Legionaries, which are your standard troops that have solid melee and give him wound rerolls, which is very, very handy to help him punch up. Chosen are more elite and give him advance and charge, which is very useful if you have them foot slogging or getting out of something that they just were transported in. And Nemesis Claw is a bit of a halfway house, costing 20 points more than Legionaries, but they do offer better melee in small squads, and they do allow enemies to not use stratagems, or rather disallow them to use them. Though they will require some sort of outside help to trigger their buff, though +1 to hit is nice for the Demon Hammer, and +1 to wound is also very useful to help them punch up. They definitely seem like a very reasonable upgrade if you are relying on the wound rerolls to fish for devastating wounds. Definitely all 3 are solid choices, and I think they all have their places in almost any list, really. I'm just using Apothecary White, the contrast paint by Games Workshop, to shade all of the white areas that we just painted up. I think my bottle has gone slightly off. I'm not entirely sure why, but it just seems to act a bit differently than my other contrasts. But again, this will seek out the recesses, and try not to do what I do here by picking it up on my brush, but I applied so much I kind of had to. Regardless, moving on to the next step, I used a dry brush to simply dry brush on some blue-white onto the dragon scales to add in some more color. This is, of course, just to bring in a little bit more contrast. It is a very easy thing to do to highlight the details. Next, we're going to cover his special ability, which is a once per battle phase, along with a once per turn ability, which is also very useful. Let's cover both now, starting with the once per battle ability. That is, of course, Chance for Glory, which is once per battle at the start of the fight phase. This model can use this ability. If it does until the end phase, add one to this model's melee weapons, attacks, AP, strength, and damage characteristics. This is great on all its melee weapon options, of course. Demon Hammer goes up to strength 6, or at 6 attacks at strength 9, AP 3, and damage 3. All very powerful, no doubt. Now let's move to the once per battle round ability. This is, of course, Lord of Chaos, which allows you to target your unit once per battle round with a discounted stratagem. This is very useful for almost any detachment, of course, and allows you to use super powerful combos or make it so they're more reliable to get into combat. This is something you should be using every turn, of course. This step is a fairly simple one. While this cape isn't as billowing or as fancy as a lot of them, it's still pretty easy to highlight, so I simply mixed in some flesh tone with my Screamer Pink, and applied some very simple highlights to the middle section, the edges, and things like that. I probably should have done an extra coat of this, if I'm being completely honest, as it did come out quite dull. So either mix in a little bit more flesh tone, or just do a 3rd or even 4th coat of this to really bring out the flowingness of the cape, even though it isn't quite as flowy as someone like Abaddon's, for example. Thankfully, this cape is very far removed from the body, so it is very easy to paint up in that regard. Beyond that, I also did just do a little bit of this on the tabard, of course, as there is a little bit of Screamer Pink there, as you can see. We've just about covered everything that the Chaos Lord does innately, though I would like to cover his other weapon options, which we'll do now. He can take a Chain Blade, which is 7 attacks that hit on 2s at strength 4, AP 1, and damage 1. A horde clearing weapon, but not really what he wants, unless you have something that gives you perhaps extra strength or damage on your melee weapons, you just want more attacks. The Power Fist replaces your Plasma Pistol with 5 attacks, hit on 2s at strength 8, AP 2, and damage 2, a good companion to the Chain Blade or the Accursed Weapon, which is 6 attacks, hit on 2s at strength 5, AP 2, and damage 1. Solid for killing Space Marines, though again, I'd still say ill-equipped, unless you're bringing the Power Fist as well. I then took a white ink, I believe, and I painted this into the eye sockets of his armor. Now these eyes are quite deep, Even still, I would just be pretty loose with it, get it in there, and you can patch it up later. And then use Rhinox hide on all the straps and things, the ones on his right thigh and left calf, and the one holding the bit of dragon skin to his power pack, and also, of course, his belt. This is a pretty standard brown color. Really, any brown would work. I just think that the rich warmth to this color brings something nice to the model. We're just about done, though I did also use this to paint the grip on his sword, as I was going to paint that up in a slightly different color scheme, though I still used brown for the grip, just because I think it tied into the color scheme I had planned well. Next, we're going to take just a little bit of a metal color. This could be lead belcher or your silver ink again, and we're going to go around and patch things up, and also use this to sort of edge highlight any prominent areas like the crest on his helmet. I also used, of course, this to patch up the little white spots that got on his helmet. You would just apply a little bit of this, then a little bit of Achillean green to fix those areas. This is fairly standard, though I did also use this later on in the color scheme when I was painting the blade, but don't paint the blade entirely silver, as I painted it mainly black and used this for the edge. As you can see, I'm just applying more of this around the most pokey out bits and sharp corners of the trim of his armor, just to add in a little bit more metallic shine to the duller gray-blue metal around here. And I also use this to fill in any vents or anything that I missed before, and it all worked quite well. It's very simple. Again, the details here are very crisp, so it's easy enough to just use the side of your brush most of the time to highlight these things. But now that we've covered all of the sort of rules for the Chaos Lord, I figure we can go into a little bit of fluff for this guy, as I do enjoy making up stories for my characters. Of course, this guy is an evident duelist given his massive sword, and the dead dragon on his shoulder shows that he likes to hunt great beasts. So, of course, I wanted to encapsulate that by painting up the sword in a different way than I usually would, by making it look almost more like a loyalist weapon than a traitor weapon. Of course, he is Alpha Legion, so maybe he is ultimately a loyalist marine, but that doesn't mean he's not going to carve him up. Here you can also see that I used Bealtan Green the Wash in the eye sockets, though I did slightly overfill them. Just go back in with a dry brush, sap away most of the excess, and you'll get these really nice, bright, glowing green eyes, or a similar effect. Here you can see I used a gold, a color I don't use on my Alpha Legion very often, to color the hilt, and I also edge highlight it with the same silver, as well as the blade that is black. I figured that he took this from some Space Marine champion that he bested in combat, and now wields it as his own weapon, hence why he uses a different color scheme to the rest of his armor. I think that's always sort of a cool story going on in any kind of fiction, really. That just about covers it, and the rest of it is mostly up to you because of how you want to base your model. Of course, we know the Alpha Legion have fought most of the Loyalist Marines at one point or another, so you could do anything for the helmet I put here, if you even put a helmet there. Though personally I went for a very dirty-looking Ultramarine, just because I think that fits. After all, the Ultramarines and the Alpha Legion did have a rather large battle, and I believe the 35th millennium, if I'm not mistaken, where Rabute at least believed he killed Omegon, though it's not really confirmed, and even the Ultramarines don't believe they did it. Anyways, that just about wraps up this video. Let's take a look at the final product. Here we are, as you can see, this based, everything's fully painted. This guy wasn't too hard to paint. I actually quite enjoyed doing it, though I will admit, again, this turnaround footage was recorded some 10-12 months after he was first painted, so he's a bit dusty, unfortunately. I do need to get a much better storage solution. Overall, I'm quite happy with how he came out. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.